We had so many questions put forward for this month that we've had to split it into 2 parts. So here is the second part of the questions. Hello, I'm Rosie Hardy. This is Rosie Hardy Gardening. If you enjoy our videos, please do subscribe to the channel. Let's carry on. So if your questions weren't answered in the first part, then hopefully I managed to answer your questions in this one. Hi Rosie, I've inherited from previous owners a huge patch of Alstroemeria which has spread thuggishly. Apart from attempting to dig up all the tubers, which I'm really struggling to find time to do, is there any other way of eradicating it you'd recommend? I'm so cross with it, I'd like to completely gone. It's covering about 5 square metres. That sounds though it's really taken over. Now some of these plants are great, and if they've been left and they run around, there's very little you can do apart from digging it all out, which you say you haven't got time for, or when it is younger and just starting to come through, then using some form of herbicide. You can try covering over with black matting, but that's only going to stop the first lot of growth. It's not going to kill off those tubers which are running around underneath the ground. You've got to remove them or get them to be killed, and the easiest way is either digging up or using a recommended herbicide and following the instructions, please. Hello Rosie, I wondered if you could help and give advice on a part sun border midday sun with clay soil is riddled with buttercups. There is too much space between the plants and the buttercups are taking advantage. Do you recommend a ground cover in particular or mulch? Thank you. I did plant certain realism recommended and waited for it to flower. Okay, and you're in the French Alps, Lucille. Okay, so you need to be digging out those buttercups, and if it's creeping buttercup, you need to be taking out the whole plant and finding where the runners are going and then get those out as well. It is a bit by bit, so clear a bit, put some ground cover plants in there. Mulch is only going to help the actual buttercups grow because they like moisture, so therefore you're going to be enclosing moisture in there. So you've got to be thinking of an eradication process. Now, you may have too many to do it all in one step, so go slowly. Get an area eradicated with them, put in some good ground cover that you like, and then go on to the next patch. When you put the new lot in, then mulch around, and that way you will get it cleared. Don't try and do the whole thing all in one. If you don't mind spraying with a herbicide, then you can do that as well, but it is much better if you can eradicate a piece at a time, get it planted up, and then go on to the next bit. Cut off the flowers by all means, then you won't get seeding around. That's another way of helping growth, and also cutting the plants and getting rid of foliage will weaken them a bit when you've got them in patches that you haven't got to, and then just start eradicating. Hi Rosie, I have a propagation question. What is the best way to propagate Caryopteris Q Blue and Brunnera Jack Frost? Well, Caryopteris Q Blue is one that you would take early spring cuttings or tip cuttings from, or semi-ripe. So there are 2 different types of cuttings you can do on that. Because it's got a slightly grey foliage, you need to be putting it into quite a gritty propagation compost, and take good tip cuttings early on or a little bit later before they're going to flower. So sometime in the midsummer you can take what are known as semi-ripe cuttings, where you're taking a bit of the young growth and then the bit of wood that has started to turn colour, and both will work on those. Then the Brunnera is divisions, so you would divide them either in the autumn or the spring. That is the easiest way to get those. You can do basal cuttings if you don't want to lift the plant up, which means you're going to the side of the plant and taking a small piece off, and both of those methods will work well for both of those plants. If you enjoy propagation, then please do take time to look at our propagation workshop. You will see there is a link below, or even a QR code on the screen. The propagation workshop is one that you can go through it. It doesn't disappear after time, it remains yours, so you can pop back and look at things, and it takes you through all of the stages for producing and propagating herbaceous perennials. Hello, I'm thinking of adding some bearded irises in my mixed borders. Can I plant them in the middle of the border among the other plants where their roots are shaded by other plants, or do they really need to be on their own where the sun can bake their roots? Now, I have always thought that it is a plant that you can mix in, and I have asked iris growers who have been growing over time. They say, to be honest, yes, they will move themselves up out of the soil and the rhizomes will sit there so that they will catch any light that is possible, but you can put them into the middle of the borders. But the thing to remember is the plants do require splitting regularly, so every 2 to 3 years you need to be getting rid of the dead bit in the middle and rejuvenating what is there and giving them some food. So by all means add them in. Use ones which are probably stronger growth, so use some really good strong varieties. Things such as straightforward Iris pallida. Pallida is very, very good in a mixed border, and that will show up really nicely. Hi Rosie, last year I planted a Jugger reptans chocolate chip. Each year it has spread to about 50 centimetres, producing multiple flowers. I have clay soil. However, when I plant and mix organic material compost to the planting hole, they're in a position they are most likely in light shade. After a while, some, not all of the flower spikes, collapse before they have finished flowering. Do you think, despite my efforts, they would prefer to be in more well-drained soil? And after watching a previous video, I wonder whether I've been overwatering them. Thank you. If you are getting collapse on your ajuga, on the flowers, then I think perhaps you are overwatering, because as you say, you have got a clay soil. So even though you're putting them in with a good mix as you put it into the planting hole, once you water, the clay will hold a lot of that water in there. And so I think perhaps that might be the problem. Ajuga are quite happy in damper places. They're also happy in part shade, and then they'll move out and move around into other areas. So just be aware that, you know, sometimes with overwatering they can collapse a bit like they would do if they were underwatered. So I think that might be your problem. Hi Rosie, just wondering if Sidalcia malviflora and Lythrum salicaria are invasive. The lady I bought it from said that Sidalcia and Lythrum don't spread and are not invasive and can be planted in the garden bed with my other perennials. There are too much info in the internet, some saying invasives, others saying not. It's very frustrating and confusing. Best regards from Scandinavia. Okay, so you will find a lot of information saying that Lythrum salifolia and that Sidalcia malviflora are highly invasive and should not be grown. This applies to the USA and Canada because they have a real problem with them taking over in their natural environment. In Europe, however, these are native plants and therefore they are not a problem with you putting them into your garden because they will not become invasive. So that is the difference, and when you're looking at comments on the internet, you need to put in a specific search. Don't have all over the world. Put in your locale, because it will be different from people who have used the plants, say in Scandinavia or in parts of Europe neighbouring you, to people who are in the United States, where they are both banned plants. I have to say that they're not allowed to import them, they're not allowed to grow them anymore. So yes, they are invasive in different parts of the world, but they're not invasive in Europe. I hope that helps you. Right, where are we? Hi Rosie, have you got any tips on how to get rid of Spanish bluebells? They are definitely invasive. Oh dear. So Spanish bluebells, yes, highly invasive. Get rid of all flower. That's the first thing. Don't let them seed around. But they have two ways of attack, I'm afraid. Not only do they self-seed around, they also have bulbs that divide and multiply underground. It is a difficult thing. They are a garden thug, yes, absolutely. So whenever you see a clump, get rid of the flower. Then dig down, dig really deep and get as much of that bulb out as you possibly can. They really do pull themselves down quite deeply and get it out. You will have to have a regime of getting one area cleared and going through. If that's not a possibility, then you will have to resort, I'm afraid, to a herbicide. But then you've got to be very, very careful that you don't spray onto any of your protected plants. So you could put a hood over the top of them and then spray them so the spray is within and just on those, and that will help. Follow the guidelines on the herbicide thing. If you don't want to use herbicides, then unfortunately it is cutting off the flower, stopping them seeding, and then digging out, and do it batch by batch. That's the only way that you can do it, I'm afraid. I'm in Suffolk, and consistently my flowers open 3 weeks more later than the others nearby. It continues year after year. I have daffs hanging about, salvias are on later. The front and back both small, shady. Is the shade and therefore lack of warmth enough reason for this? Is there anything I can do about it other than adjust my planting? Suffolk-based garden that was all grass until 3 years ago. Thank you for excellent educational videos. Thank you very much. This sounds as though you've got a microclimate. Also, if this was just grass, then it could be that you haven't got very much in the way of fertilizer and nutrients in that soil as well. I think you need to be adding as much mulch as you can to help the garden, because I know in Suffolk you can be quite dry. Shadiness will keep it cooler, and so I would think to yourselves, just adjust what planting you're putting in. You're not going to speed it up unless you get some much earlier spring flowering stuff, and garden with the situation that you have got. There are microclimates well within certain areas around you. You really can't fight against it. So go for plants that like being the shade, go for slightly earlier flowering ones, add in the organic matter into the soil, and then that will hopefully warm the soil a little bit more. So therefore I would just say go with what you've got. Hi Rosie, I'm quite far from your nursery, but I love your videos. I usually plant in the spring and the autumn, but some of the herbaceous I'd like to plant are not available to buy in nurseries because they're not in season. Is there anything that determines when a herbaceous perennial is in season to buy? Thank you. This is all to do with the season. It is all to do with how nurseries grow their plants. Some people are growing in polythene tunnels, and therefore they have plants ready earlier, and we don't know, we don't have a crystal ball to know what is going to be the favourite plant that people are going to buy. So we grow so many and we add a few each year onto the number that we normally produce, hoping that we've got enough for supply out there. Here on our nursery we grow everything outside, so our plants, when they are ready for mail order, have to have a good root ball, otherwise they get shaken out of their pot in the delivery process. We try as best we can to package them in a way that they will stay within that root ball, but you know, if they get thrown around on the back of a delivery lorry, we try our hardest. So we send them out slightly harder, with more root on them. Overwintered, so say we've got plants left over from the previous year, those will go out earlier, and then the next batches of those will not come online until they are well rooted. So it's all to do with the growing cycle, and it may not be when they are ready, say growing in your garden, but what you can do is you can buy when they are ready, and if you don't want to plant then you can plant it later. Or some nurseries will hold stuff for you, and then you can get them sent out at the time that you're ready to plant. It's all to do with the growing seasons. Last year was a very late growing season. This year it's a very early growing season. So it is difficult to be able to determine when the plants are ready. But we will only send out when they are ready in their pots, fully grown, good top growth, good root growth, and then they're ready to go out. So not everything will be ready at the same time for sending out. I hope that helps you and clarifies it a bit. Hi Rosie from Munich, Germany. Is there a repeat flowering rose that is good for pollinators and also has a good fragrance? Hello. Now, as you may know, roses are not my favourite plants, only because I love them in other people's gardens. Don't get me wrong on that. I have absolutely no problem with with them in other people's gardens. But to me, in my garden, if they've got thorns, I get attacked. So that's the reason I tend not to do them. I will have a relook at this question and give you a proper answer, because I have to think about the roses that I love, that I know are repeat flowering, and off the top of my head I cannot remember the names. So I will return to your question with an answer, and I will do it at the end of this video. Any tips for dealing with carpal tunnel and back as a professional gardener? Asking for a friend. Oh gosh, you know, carpal tunnel, I'm afraid, you know, unless you use wrist supports, you're going to have an operation. There isn't an awful lot you can do. If you're continually using secateurs, you're you know, doing that type of job, it is very, very difficult. Rest, recuperate. And the same with your back, you know, remembering if you have a back problem, kneel. Or remember, you know, health and safety wise, if you're lifting stuff, bend your knees, lift properly, all of that. Don't overdo it. Pilates and yoga are brilliant for helping with backs. It will help you relax, and it will help straighten out the knots in the muscles which are causing the problems. More than anything else, the back problems tend to be muscular rather than anything else that will happen. So take time to be good to yourself and kind to yourself. A soak in a good bath sometimes helps as well, and then yoga and Pilates, I would recommend those too. Hi Rosie, I struggle with snails and slugs. Lost a lot of slug resistant plants. Yeah, that is it. Added mulch and ship wool pellets, nothing helps. I have a sunny space and a big part of the garden is in shade and damp clay soil. Okay, so this damp clay soil in shade is where they are going and hiding at night. And if you can get natural predators, then that is really helpful. In, you know, the more birds you can get in, the more frogs, that sort of thing that you can get into your garden will really help. Nighttime patrols, going out with a head torch on, a bucket, getting the slugs and snails and putting them into that will really, really help reduce. Those then need to go somewhere. I've heard ducks are very good. If you are in a garden where you can get, they are brilliant at getting rid of all the slugs and snails, and if you get small ducks, they don't cause too much problem, but it depends on whether you can actually do that. The wool does work, but you have to keep on putting it down, so that is something to do. It's one of those things, you know, we have had such a wet winter, not too cold, the populations are high. You just have to go out there and just physically get rid of them, I'm afraid. That's all you can do. Hi Rosie, when planting up containers, what is the best way to gauge the distance needed between plants? I've seen it said to put plants close together in pots or containers than you would when planting the ground, but is there a rule of thumb when working this out? Thanks very much. No, not really any rule of thumb. It depends on how full you want the containers to look. So a lot of these big containers that you see outside, say hotels or big houses, etc., the plants are put in literally pot thick right the way through to give a really good exuberance and growing. If you're putting plants in and you're don't want any gapping there, then you do need to be quite close together, allowing for the fact that they will grow out a bit. You may be potting up a container and allowing it to grow, in which case you can put them a little bit further apart. But it's really how you like the look of your container. So just go for it. If you want it big and blousy, put them in full. If you want it to grow into being more complete, then put them a little bit further apart, but nowhere near as far spacing as you do in the ground, because otherwise you're just leaving room for weed seedlings to get in there. I have a very high pH alkaline soil, would like to try and grow some red grape. It says that it's a neutral soil. I have a raised bed with blueberries happily growing. Haven't done it, but the blueberries are growing well. I use acidic soil fertiliser on this raised bed and they are happy. So would you recommend I put the grapes in the same bed? Are grapes in containers okay? I like experimenting. Well, if your raised bed is growing your blueberries perfectly well, as you say, they prefer slightly acidic soil, then absolutely. And yes, grapes can be put into a confined space. And they're like a bit of a root run, but there's no reason why you cannot grow them in a raised bed. If you're feeding that okay, then they should be perfectly fine. I would go ahead and put it in there. Alkaline soils are fine for growing grapes, but you tend to find that most of the grapes that are grown on alkaline soils tend to be your champagne varieties or that type. But you know, you may find it grows perfectly well. So if you have two, put one in the raised bed, put one out in the soil and see what happens. Plants for spring when you go from cold to hot with no transition. Most spring bloomers don't stand a chance before it gets hot. Zone 6 US. Okay, I'm basically understanding what you're meaning here is that you go from really quite a cool to absolutely baking hot. And I have to say that has happened here in the UK. And basically what happens is your spring plants come into flower, suddenly gets boiling hot, they're over within an instant, and that is it. And I'm afraid there's not a lot you can do. If that transition is not gentle, then they aren't really going to have any chance. So it's almost a point where it may be better to grow things which are more foliage, say, for the spring, and then allow those to grow on and then have better flower once you get into that hotter summer. It is a tricky one, I'm afraid, and there's not a very easy way of solving it. You can create more shade that will keep it slightly cooler, but that's about the only thing I can recommend. My cherry sparks Penstemon plants didn't seem to survive the Michigan winter, even though it was more protected than the midnight masquerade. Should I wait a while, see any signs of life, or try to move it? They are in rocky soil, while midnight masquerade were rescued clearance plants in clay soil. So it may be the difference in the soil types there, but if they haven't reappeared and the others have, then cut your losses, find something else, put them in. You do find that some penstemons prefer a heavier soil, and there are some penstemons that prefer a lighter, more rocky soil. So more of the sort of alpine type penstemon would be better in your drier soil, whereas your more woodland type penstemons will be happier in the clay soils. So that would be something. I think it might be plant choice and type rather than anything else. So go and get a new one. Rosy, I follow all the advice in your videos and your propagation course. Thanks, I'm having a lot of success. I'm glad to hear it. I would just like to know the next steps going forward for my newly rooted cuttings. If I'm saving the plants in pots to give away next year, not this. Okay, so your newly rooted cuttings want to be potted into a container, not too large. Put them into a multi-purpose container. You can add in slow release fertilizer into that container if you want, or if you're not going to do that, then remember to water with a bit of feed, perhaps once a month. That will be fine. So use something like Maxi Crop, that is a good form. And then if they get to the point where you can see the roots coming out, and if you turn them up and take them off, they've got a really good root run, put them into a next size up pot and then overwinter them in those containers, and then you can give them away to friends. Hello Rosie, what's the secret to growing Leilia Cardonalis? I planted some last spring and it didn't grow any larger than when I bought it at the nursery, 2 inches high and 5 inches wide. It produced no flowers. This spring it seems to have survived the winter a bit worse for wear and has so far not shown any noticeable new growth. I'm in Montreal, zone 5B. Well, we stopped growing Leilia Cardonalis a long time ago because we found that it was just slug fodder. So you would put them out, you'd get them growing, they'd go out on the nursery, in come the slugs and snails, no plants left. It is not an easy one. It does require quite a lot of moisture. There are better forms of the purple leafed lobelias that you can find, or the green leafed ones tend to be stronger as well. I would suggest you don't say whether it is in a you don't say whether you've got them in containers or whether you've put them in the ground. I would suggest if they're in the ground, put them into a container, give them a bit of food, give them a good amount of moisture, and then see if they do better that way than in the ground. But to be honest, I would try and find something else which has the lovely red flower and that will do better for you, because they can be tricky plants. Hi Rosie, what is the best way to deal with daffodils and spring tulips that have gone over so that they come back next year? Thank you. You need to leave all the leaves on there to go back and feed the bulbs. It is never a good idea to consider that your tulips are going to come back and be as good next year. Replanting each year is by far the best, unless you have got species tulips, in which case they will come back and multiply. But if it's your normal showy tulips, the Dutch master type ones, then you're going to be needing to plant those each year. If it's your narcissus, your daffodils, then you need to leave all the foliage there. Just lay it out flat. All of the food needs to go back down into the plants. Do not cut it off. Do not tie them up. If you need to hide them, just lay them down flat, and then the goodness out of those leaves will go into the bulbs. That is fine. When the plants are actually growing and coming through, you should be giving them a little bit of bulb fertilizer. That will also help quite considerably with them. All right, and that is the key thing with those. So no cutting off of the leaves, give them some bulb fertilizer, and just allow all of that goodness to go back into the ground and replant your tulips. Now I'm going to go back to that rose question that I was asked from the person in Munich, and you didn't say whether you wanted it to be a climber or whether you wanted me to give you a shrub. So I've got you two that I like and that I love. Alberic barbarae is a really beautiful rambling rose, and I love that. Always had it in my mother's garden. It was great. It rambled through trees, and we had it on a stable wall as well. So that one, absolutely fine. Then Tuscany Superb, if you want a shrub rose with good colour, good strong vibrant colour, good perfume, that one I would suggest as well. So Tuscany Superb and Alberic barbarae are my two choices of rose for you with scent and reblooming. Thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch another video of mine, YouTube thinks this one is perfect for you.